Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to the launch of our new series titled Finding the Silver Linings Through Character Building Times, where we'll be highlighting various faculty and staff across the university and medical center who have overcome many relatable adversities, and then will share their stories and practical resilience building strategies to overcome those obstacles while prioritizing their wellness. Our first presenter today is Dr. Angus Fletcher with his talk on the healing power of our own story. As we know, the most powerful story for helping our brains heal from burnout, grief, and even trauma is the story of our lives. In this talk, we'll learn why our stories can be so powerful, and then do a simple exercise that will help us put us in touch with the buried power of our own life. Dr. Fletcher is a professor of story science at the Ohio State University's Project Narrative, the world's leading academic institute for the study of how stories work. His research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Mellon Foundation, and the Academy for Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. In 2023, he was awarded the Commendation Medal by the U.S. Army for groundbreaking research with the Army Nurse Corps and the Army Special Operations. Dr. Fletcher has taught for the University of Southern California, Stanford, and Teach for America, and is now a professor here at Ohio State. Please help me welcome Dr. Fletcher.
Hello, Ohio State College of Nursing. I'm coming to you today from my lab at Ohio State's Project Narrative, and I'm going to share with you a practical method that we've recently uncovered through our research of getting more benefits from gratitude. But first, I'm going to start by debunking two popular myths about my area of expertise, which is story. The first myth is that story is for communicating. This is what most of us are taught in school or in business classes, that the power of story is to share our thoughts with other people. We're told that story is something that we tell to other people. The second myth that I'd like to debunk is that story is for persuading those other people. It's something we use to market our ideas. It's something we use to spin, to sell, to make our ideas sound as best as they possibly can. If any of you have ever had the experience recently of filling out an application, which you had to tell them your personal story, your personal narrative, you'll know what that experience is of trying to shape your story in just the perfect way to get the people reading it to give you exactly what they want. This is how story is thought of in politics. This is how story is thought of in marketing. And of course, this is how story is thought all across the internet, where we're constantly being told to shape our story in a way that makes it as compelling to other people. Why are these myths? Well, to start with the first one, story did not, in fact, evolve to communicate. It evolved in our brain as a way of thinking. All of us think all the time in stories. So when you get up in the morning, you make a plan for your day. When you think back over your life, you think about it as a series of events, of actions, of activities. And this function of thinking in story is incredibly ancient. It goes back before verbal communication. It goes back before language. It goes back before even humans. It goes all the way back hundreds of millions of years ago to the very origins of the animal neuron, which means that dogs think in story, birds think in story, all animal life thinks in story. And the stories that we think influence the way that we act. If you tell yourself one story about your life, it might bring you joy or optimism. If you think to yourself another story of your life, it might bring you grief. And these stories are incredibly powerful. And the stories we put into our head have profound impacts on the way that our brains function. They can increase our creativity. They can increase our courage. They can increase our empathy. They can increase our ability to see the future, which is something that you will probably have experienced in your life when you've read an incredibly powerful poem, or maybe as a child when you picked up a book and you saw things which no one in the world had seen yet. And then they came true. So story is not for communicating. Story is for thinking. And the second myth, story did not evolve to persuade. It's not a form of marketing, of spin. Story evolved to surface the deeper truths about our world and about ourselves. And that's why when we go to see a play such as Shakespeare's Hamlet, even though Hamlet isn't real, even though there never was a prince of Denmark, even though none of the things that Hamlet says in Shakespeare's play are things that anyone said in real life, even though it's all a fiction, it still connects us to something true, something deeper about life. And that's why fiction, poetry, all these forms of stories have existed for thousands of years of tools for connecting us to our deeper selves, for making us feel something tremendously authentic about our hearts, our minds, and life in general. So when you debunk both of those myths, what that means is, first of all, the most powerful stories are the stories that we tell ourselves. And second, the most powerful stories are also true stories, which means that the most powerful story that we can tell ourselves in our life is the true story of ourselves. And I have here a picture of Maya Angelou because her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is an example of one of those tremendously powerful stories, a true story of oneself that made her into an incredible human being. And when we read it, inspires us in our own minds to do something known as autobiographical recall, or think of moments in our own life that come back to us, that we retell, that make us strong ourselves. So that's very straightforward. All of us should go out there right now and spend the rest of our lives telling ourselves the true story about ourselves. But the reality is, most of us can't tell that story. Most of us cannot tell ourselves the true story of ourselves. If you ask most people to sit in quiet and reflect over the events of their life, or ask them to sit down and write out their memoirs, they will skip over parts. They will avoid parts. Or they'll just put the whole project aside and distract themselves and go do something else. And this isn't just true of ordinary people. This is true of all of us. I work every day with heroes. I work with United States Army Special Operators. This individual here, who you can partly see, although his face is obscured. His name is Tom Satterley. He's a former command sergeant major of Delta Force. And he struggled for years to tell his own story. He struggled with suicidal ideation, grief, didn't want to go back and reflect on the events of his past. I've worked with many, many nurses in the U.S. Army Nursing Corps who are heroes, individuals, nurses who are scared of flying, but nevertheless get into helicopters, fly into war zones, and then jump out of those helicopters to rescue people. I've talked with nurses who have done incredible acts of charity, who have had incredible acts of strength, nurses who helped evacuate during the evacuation of Afghanistan and Kabul, who were standing in these huge cargo planes filled with people fleeing for safety from the Taliban. And one of them had a mother come up to her, and that mother handed the nurse her dead child, her deceased infant, and said to her, "This is my child. I cannot take care of her anymore. I need to go and take care of my other children who are alive. Please take care of my child. Bury my child." And you think of the nurse who receives that child and has to take it and has to bury it. Think of the enormous strength. And yet she struggles to think back on that moment and the other moments of heroism that she's lived in her life. And these heroes who walk among us, perhaps you were one of these heroes, instead of telling their true story of themselves to themselves, they dissociate, they deflect, they drink, they engage in all these avoidance strategies. Why is that? Why is it so hard for us to tell the true story of ourselves to ourselves? Well, the answer is because story is connected in the brain to emotion. They're very, very strong partners. And that's why when you hear a powerful story, it immediately stimulates powerful feelings inside you. And those feelings are good. Those feelings are our friends. But in our modern world, which is obsessed with efficiency and reason, we've become alienated from our own hearts. We don't know what our emotions are telling us. And so we struggle with them. And we have developed a couple of unhelpful ways of dealing with the emotions that surface when we tell ourselves our personal story. The first thing that we like to do is we like to eliminate emotion as quickly as possible. And the other thing we like to do is treat it as if it's some kind of mystical power. And so there's this duality that emerges where on the one hand, we deny that emotion exists because we're so out of touch with it. And then when we do allow it into our lives, we're so removed from it that we can't understand it as a practical, physical, material thing. And instead we turn it into something otherworldly, something magical, something more than human. And both of these responses are ultimately unhelpful. The first response, which is to say, trying to get rid of emotion or move past it as quickly as possible, gives us various things like pop stoicism and pop mindfulness, which encourage us whenever we feel a negative emotion or emotion we don't want to deal with, to detach from it, to put it aside, to rush on to other things, and just to get the emotion out of our life as quickly as possible. Whereas the other approach, mysticizing emotion, leads to non-scientific theories such as EQ, which encourages us to believe that if we build our powers of empathy, somehow this allows us to have telepathy and we can magically go into the heads of other people and know what they're thinking. When of course we know that people who believe that they can immediately understand what other people are feeling typically are engaging in what we call false empathy. You'll probably have experienced this in your own life if something hard has happened to you, if you had a moment of shock or grief, and you start sharing it with someone, and before you can finish, they interrupt you and they say, oh, I know exactly how you feel. The exact same thing happened to me. That's them engaging in false empathy because they think they have this magic ability through their emotions to understand what you're thinking. And we know that deeply empathetic people, and we know this because we work a lot with nurses, with other caregivers, deeply empathetic people are very careful and they listen very carefully and they respect that other people are very different from them. And they don't leap into empathy. They don't assume that just because they feel a connection or they feel care or they feel love for someone, that they know exactly what that person is thinking. So this is the second approach, which is unhelpful, which is thinking that our emotions are somehow magical. The truth about emotion, it's very simple. It's very scientific. It's simply that emotion evolved to help our brain understand itself. It's our brain's signal system to itself. It's saying, here's what's going on inside you. And since emotion and narrative are tightly connected, that signal system is particularly helpful at helping our brain understand what's going on with its life story. It's particularly helpful at helping our brain surface what its life story is and helping it discover its true story about itself. So I'll walk you through a simple example of this, which is the example of shame. I feel a lot of shame when I think back over my life. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I'm sure there are many people watching this that look back over their life and have shame or regret or guilt at some of the actions that they've taken. And because shame is such an incredibly powerful emotion, it's one of the most ancient emotions in the human brain. We have a tendency in our modern world, because we have a difficult time dealing with emotions, to want to just rush past it and pretend as though it doesn't exist. And so it's very common for us to avoid, ignore, dissociate from shame. But we shouldn't do that, because that shame is a signal from our deep brain. And what it's saying to us is it's saying there's a moment in your life story that you haven't made peace with yet. And what you want to do is you want to go back to that moment and you want to say to yourself, am I ashamed because I did something wrong in that moment? Did I not live up to the way that I want to live? If so, I have to work through and understand why I acted that way. And I have to change that behavior and integrate my life story so that I don't do it again. Or maybe we feel shame, not because we did something wrong, but because we did something brave and the rest of the world just made us feel bad about it. In which case we have to go back to that moment and we have to affirm that moment. And we have to say, you did the right thing. You shouldn't be ashamed. You should have courage and you should repeat that behavior. You should repeat that behavior again and again and again. And so shame is telling us to go back to those moments, because if we don't go back to those moments, then our life story in those moments is brittle. And so when a similar occasion comes up to us in the present, instead of changing our behavior or acting courageously, we'll deflect, we'll avoid, we'll dissociate, will not be our true selves. We won't live our true narrative. And so shame is a signal that helps us be stronger in who we are, either by changing to become our better selves or by doubling down on the things about ourselves that are good that the world doesn't understand. So that's just a very simple example of how our emotions are a signal system that will allow us to process, work through, strengthen, and improve our life story. Make it more true to what it wants to be. We can talk all day about the different emotions in our brain and how they connect to our life story. I have a book about it, which is a very, very long book. Some might say a very tedious book. But if you're interested in more of this, you can read that book. It's called Wonderworks. It has 25 different emotions that it goes through and kind of how they relate to narratives and stories and so on and so forth. But today, we're not going to go through that big book. Today, we're just going to focus on one particular emotion, which is gratitude. One of the most powerful emotions of all. Now, thanks to a lot of wonderful research, gratitude's enormous psychological power has been discovered. I'm sure you've experienced it a little bit in your life. And I'm sure you've also experienced people encouraging you to express more gratitude, maybe keep a gratitude journal, these kinds of activities. And unfortunately, because there has been so much emphasis on the power of gratitude, there's also been a tendency nowadays to make gratitude a little pro forma, a little institutional. So it's something that we're encouraged to do all the time on the internet and other places. And instead of having that spontaneous, deep feeling that is so necessary for emotion to work, sometimes it just feels like a mechanical step or something we do as an organizational routine or a kind of slogan that we pick up, that we pin on the wall to remind ourselves about. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and just be a little deeper and a little more precise over our talk about what gratitude is, how it works, and then we're going to go into a way to get more out of gratitude in our lives, even if we're already getting quite a bit. So to start with what we already know about gratitude, what we know is that the power of gratitude is to help us heal grief and to heal anger, turning them into love. And the way that we do this is we, again, go back to our life story and we go back to those moments in our life story that are causing us grief or causing us anger. So maybe moments of loss, moments where something has been taken from us. Or in the case of moments of anger, maybe someone has acted against us or life has acted against us in a way that makes us feel threatened and vulnerable. And we feel we need to protect ourselves by getting angry and fighting back. And with gratitude, we can go back to those moments and we can find things about those moments that we are grateful for. And by expressing gratitude, so for example, in the case of us having lost someone we care about, instead of focusing on the fact that they are departed, we can focus on the fact that we had a chance to live with them. And they gave us gifts that we now carry on with us in our life. And we can express gratitude towards that life. And the more gratitude we express in those ways, the more that the grief starts to pass, which is very healthy, because even though grief is an important signal to us that we have things in our life that we have to go back and our life story that we have to go back and resolve, if we hold on to grief for too long, it interferes with the normal operations of our life. It makes us less effective as a caregiver, makes us less able to be kind and strong to the people around us. And the same thing goes for anger. Even though anger is an important signal and it tells us, oh, here's something that came and threatened you, and you have to go back and work through that threat and find out how to be strong. If we carry the anger with us for too long, it does all sorts of psychological and bodily harm to us and interferes with our relationships with others. So gratitude is an incredibly powerful tool. If we can go back, and if someone made us very, very angry in the past, if we can go back and express gratitude towards something else they did for us, that can be very healing. So we can still learn the lesson from the anger, but not carry the negative emotion with us. So that's what we know about gratitude. We know that it can be very powerful in helping us heal in these ways, but we also know that it's really, really hard to do these things. It's really, really hard to use gratitude in these ways. It's hard to go back to moments of grief and express gratitude. It's even harder to go back to someone who's made us angry and express gratitude towards them. So what we're going to talk about today is the secret to making that process a little bit easier. And the secret is another function of gratitude. And that other function of gratitude occurs not when we express gratitude towards others, but when they express gratitude towards us. And sometimes in our lives, when someone expresses gratitude towards us, it means a great deal to us. So over the course of your life, many times people will say thank you. I'll say thank you. You might hear thank you said to you 10 times today. But of those 10 times, maybe only one of them really touches you in an emotional way, in a deep way. And when someone expresses gratitude towards you and it touches you in a deep way, what that is your life story saying to you is, that is how I want to live. What this person just thanked me for doing is my true story. And all the other things that I did to get all those other thanks, that's not really my life story. That's just something I did to be polite or courteous, or just something that was expected to me because of my job. But when this person thanked me and I felt deep gratitude, it was connecting me to my deeper purpose. And what happens is when we use those moments of powerful gratitude to reconnect ourselves with our life story, it becomes easier to access gratitude's healing power. Why? Well, because the stronger we feel in our life story, the more powerfully we are able to go back to moments of grief and let go of that grief, because that grief is a protective measure. That grief is trying to stop us from caring again. It's trying to say, be safe. Don't love other people as deeply as you love that person you lost. But if we feel strong in our life story, we feel that we can handle that loss. And so we can go back and let go of that grief and open our hearts again. And the same thing with anger. That anger is a protective measure. It's saying, you are under threat. You have to fight back. Don't allow this person to get too close to you again. But if we feel strong in our narrative, we know we can be vulnerable again to that person, because that person can never destroy who we are. And that allows us to let go of that protective anger and be open even to people who hurt us, because we are so strong in our life story that we know we can always recover and have resilience. And so that's the power of the second aspect of gratitude, by surfacing our life story to make us strong enough to access gratitude, to let go of grief and anger and heal. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a couple exercises just for helping you walk through this process yourself. So we'll start with an exercise that puts you in contact with that second power that I talked about, that secret power of gratitude, to help you find your life story. Then we'll run an exercise that builds off that exercise so that you can get more healing power by moving past anger. But first, to set up those exercises, let me tell you a brief story about myself and my own relationship to gratitude. Those of you who are discerning will notice that this is not a picture of me. This is a picture of my daughter, Marlo, who's one of the most extraordinary and wonderful things in my life. But it wasn't always that way. Back at the very, very beginning, it was hard for me to be a dad, very hard, so hard that I was, in fact, a very bad dad. It started on the day that Marlo was born. My wife wakes me up in the middle of the night and she says, I think it's happening. I think it's time to go to the hospital. And I responded very heroically by having an extreme panic attack and not being able to do anything. And finally, my wife had to drive herself to the hospital with me hyperventilating in the passenger seat. We get to the hospital. My wife undergoes this thing known as childbirth. And afterwards, she says to me, Angus, she says, I'd like to have a meal to celebrate. Would you mind going out and getting me a meal? At which point I had another panic attack and laid down on the floor of the hospital. And my wife finally had to call the hospital cafeteria to bring up some food from the basement. And so you can imagine all the nurses watching my wife as she's eating this kind of soggy meal and looking at me and thinking, what a champion husband my wife has. And it didn't stop there. When my wife and I brought my daughter home, I continued to really struggle. I would wake up many, many, many times in the middle of the night and constantly go check on my daughter in the middle of the night, be unable to fall asleep. All of these difficulties being apparent, because what I haven't told you is the backstory to this is that when I was 10 years old, so the same age that my daughter Marlo is now, when I was 10 years old, I went into my younger sister's bedroom and I found her dead in her crib. This was a shocking moment for me. It was a traumatic moment for me. And it was a moment that didn't just produce a lot of grief, it also produced a lot of anger. And in particular, produced a lot of anger towards my dad, because my dad was a doctor and my dad had substance issues. And as a result, he missed what I thought were signs that he should have caught that my sister was in danger. So I carried a great deal of anger against my father for many, many, many years. I blamed him for my sister's death. And that anger not only affected my relationship with my father, it affected my relationship with myself. Because when I became a father, I had that anger inside me. And anytime I did something that was a little bit wrong, that maybe wasn't perfect in terms of my relationship with my daughter, it made me angry at myself. It made me feel like I was just like my dad. It made me feel like I was a bad dad and that I was endangering my daughter. And the more that anger built up inside me, the more crippling it became. And it caused all these other negative secondary emotions that made it impossible for me to function. And so finally, eventually, I was only able to heal and get beyond this by processing my anger towards my dad, which I did with the help of a nurse, a US Army nurse, who helped me remember all the wonderful, kind, generous things that my dad had done for me when I was a child, helped me surface all these feelings of gratitude that I had towards my father, and made me realize that he was in fact a wonderful dad in so many ways, and that I had so much to be thankful to him for. And because of that gratitude, the anger I had towards him dissolved. The anger I had towards myself dissolved. And I was able to become a much better dad to my own daughter. Although, as I'm sure she will tell you, I'm certainly still not a perfect dad. So that's the healing action of gratitude. That's a little example of how gratitude can help you heal from anger. And the story behind the story is the story of how I came to be working with the nurse who taught me the gratitude technique that healed me. Because why was I working with this nurse in the first place? Well, now, of course, you might say, well, of course, Angus, you will work with the nurse because nurses are the most wonderful people on earth. And that is, of course, true. But I'm a professor. And in my line of work, because I'm a very important professor who studies very important things, it's a requirement that I do research, that I publish in big journals, and that I get lots and lots of citations for that research. Because that is how I prove to my university that I'm a good professor. And in return for me publishing in really, really big journals and getting lots of citations, my university thanks me. It thanks me by giving me money, by giving me a salary, by giving me promotions, by giving me status, by giving me awards, by featuring me on the university homepage. My university expresses lots and lots of gratitude towards me for being a wonderful professor who publishes important research. And nurses are not considered to be part of that important research, not according to my field. So when I first started working with nurses, a lot of people in my field said, what are you doing with those nurses? That's not going to lead you to get all these sort of public accolades and publications. And myself, being a very shallow and superficial person, thought, well, yes, that's true. Maybe I shouldn't be working so much with these nurses. Until, you know what happened? I was working with nurses in the Army Nurse Corps. And one of them paused after we'd been working together. And she just said, thank you. She said, thank you for taking the time to work with us. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us. Thank you for taking the time to help us. And I was so moved by that thanks, it almost brought me to tears. And what I realized in that moment was that the simple act of gratitude that she had given to me meant more than all the public acts of gratitude that my university had given to me. And so what I call those small private acts of gratitude that mean so much, I call them Maverick Gratitude, because they go against the conventional public gratitude of our institutions. Another way of saying this is that Maverick Gratitude, it's the opposite of public honors and accolades. Those public honors and accolades are conventional, they're conformists. They reveal what the world wants us to do. The world is thanking us because we're acting in the way that the system wants us to. But Maverick Gratitude, that reveals what our heart wants to do. And we feel it all the time when we get a small thanks from someone, and it means more to us than any of those big public award ceremonies that our institutions hold for us. And what I want to suggest to you is the more that you do what the world wants you to do, the more you live your life seeking those public acts of gratitude, the more you slowly lose track of your own story. And your story becomes instead the system. But the more that you follow Maverick Gratitude, the more that you discover the narrative inside yourself that is the life that you want to live. Well, why would you do that, though? Why would you rather have your life than all the public accolades, all the public gratitude of the world? Well, the answer is the power of your personal narrative allows you to be very, very strong. Very strong. So strong that you can have gratitude for things that hurt. So strong that you can turn grief and anger into love. So strong that you can heal yourself from anything. That's the power of Maverick Gratitude. Unlike conventional gratitude, which gives you wealth and fame, Maverick Gratitude gives you the strength to be yourself, to heal yourself, and in healing yourself, to heal the lives around you. So what we're going to do now for the remainder of our time together is just walk through 2 short exercises for experiencing those 2 parts of gratitude ourselves. And these are exercises that I run with the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. You can see their logo here. And I've run them with thousands and thousands of other nurses and healthcare professionals across the world. And my purpose in sharing them with you now is maybe now when you run them, you don't get that much out of them, but I hope you remember them. And I hope you try them again in some future moment in your life. And so our opportunity here is simply just to try them, to learn them together, and see if there's something that perhaps you want to continue. So the first exercise, it's very simple, Maverick Gratitude. I want you to take out a pen and a piece of paper, and I want you to think back through your past. And I want you to remember a time when someone thanked you privately, and it meant more to you than any public recognition, more than any money or award. And I want you to write down on your paper what you did to earn that gratitude. And as you're doing that, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pause this video until you finish writing it down. Write it down in as much detail as you can, everything you can remember. Write it all down as the video is paused, and then unpause the video, and we'll move on to our next exercise together. Okay, now that you've surfaced that act of Maverick Gratitude, what you've done is you've put yourself in contact with your own life story, with what matters to you, the kind of behaviors that your heart feels are your true self. And as you hold on to that, it will make it easier for you to run this next exercise and get more out of it. And this next exercise is Gratitude Heal. So I want you to hold on to your pen and your paper, and I want you to surface someone in your memory who you have conflicted or even negative feelings towards. Someone maybe who has done you wrong, someone who you have conflict with that is unresolved. If you don't have that person in your life, maybe you're a better person than me and you don't get into conflicts with other people. If you don't have that person in your life, instead think of someone from your past who you've lost touch with, because it will have a similar effect. And now that you found that person, write them a thank you note. Write them a thank you note. That person that you're angry or conflicted towards, that person who you just let go by to the wayside, write them a thank you note. And don't just write them a general thank you note. Don't just say, I'm very thankful that you're alive. Remember something very specific that they did for you or for someone else. Remember something that you can be genuinely grateful for. Be as specific as you can. Write down what they did and thank them for it in a thank you note. And once again, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pause the video as you're writing that note to yourself, and then unpause it and we will wrap up together. Okay, now that you've unpaused the video and you've written your thank you note, I hope you felt that gratitude writing that note. It might have been challenging at first to thank someone who had done harm to you or other people you cared about. But I hope as you felt that gratitude, you suddenly felt those negative feelings turn into love, turn into positive feelings. You started to feel a sense of catharsis and a sense of strength. And what will make that feeling even stronger is if you now go and mail that letter. Can you mail that letter? Can you send that letter to the person you wrote it to? Maybe that's not time yet in your life to do that. But by even just thinking about it, that will increase the emotional push. And if you can actually thank them, that will make the healing even more powerful and profound. So that brings us to the end of our talk, the end of our time together. We've walked through the healing power of gratitude, the two different aspects of it. We've done those two exercises to help us access both parts of gratitude. We've seen how strong it can be in terms of connecting us with ourselves and healing us so that we can be strong for others. And now I would just like to end by expressing my own gratitude to the individuals who made this research possible, those individuals in U.S. Army Special Operations, and also those individuals in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. Thank them, and thank you for your time.